Good morning, everyone, and you're very welcome to this week's Let's Talk Dairy webinar. We're joined by Joseph Dunphy from the Grass10 team, and Joe will give us a quick update of what's happening nationally in terms of the grass front over the last week. And then we will have Seamus Nolan is joining us from Roscommon Longford Dairy Advisor in Roscommon Longford to give us an update as to what's happening in his own catchment. What has the conversation been with farmers over the last number of weeks, and I suppose the plan going forward over the next number of weeks into breeding. So I suppose without further ado, Joe, we'll let you kick off. As always, folks, post your questions in the chat box, and we'll endeavour to ask them to our speakers.
Great stuff, James. Thanks a million, and look, a good morning to everyone. So, look, I suppose, James, it's nice to see a good week after the, I suppose, the conditions and stuff last week. It was very, coming out of a couple of very hard weeks on man and beast, and I suppose we'll just skip the figures for a minute, but I think it's nice from a rainfall point of view in particular areas of the west to only see, back to single digits in terms of mill of rain, and less than 15 mil of rain on the forecast for the next week across the country. But just briefly on the figures, the pasture-based figures for the week: an average farm cover in around 800. Cover per livestock unit of 238 and a growth of 34. And I was just looking at a couple of group reports there this morning. There's again a huge range, and it probably links into a couple of the key points we'll just discuss there in a minute. But there's variation there throughout the country, and probably throughout farms, depending on where they are in terms of grazing, and if there's any first rotation paddocks left. Diet's probably working around maybe say 3 to 4 kilos a meal, and probably still a couple of kilo, 1.5 or 2 kilos of silage going in on some farms around the country. So looking at the growth predictions probably for the week, probably looking around 50 on some farms. So we're saying we've got a bit of fair play from the weather, although it is a little bit cool. There is a little bit of an easterly breeze there. We have the day length, we have soil temperatures in general. There's a good bit of fertilizer and slurry gone out over the last couple of weeks, which hopefully we're going to get growth rates that are needed on the farm. So I suppose, James, just a couple of key points for the week. There is variation on farms, and the only way we're going to get over that variation is to get back to a weekly measure, okay? Because as then there's on farms that are nice way into the second rotation, but there's also other farms that maybe had to house for 2 weeks there, and there's still a couple of paddocks left in the first round, and they're heavy covers on them, and they're not really growing, and maybe they might benefit from being taken out altogether, with high average farm covers of maybe well over 800. So it's important there, get back to the weekly grass walk and assess your situation. We're moving from that spring management, I suppose second point, moving from that spring management to the summer wedge. So really and truly we're looking at average farm cover per livestock unit from now on, and growth versus demand on the farm. So I suppose a key one for me would be the cover per livestock unit, probably targeting that maybe somewhere in around 180, and keeping the average farm cover there between maybe 600 and 700 depending on the stocking rate. But across stocking rates, probably somewhere in around 180 per cow is a good one to hold. And I know you're going to chat about it in a while, but I was in 3 yards this week, James, and there's no great heel of a pit left in a lot of the yards, and a lot of the surplus bales are well and truly used up after last week's poor weather. So it's important, get your areas closed up for first cut silage and apply the nutrients that's needed, for that first cut, and get your grazing fertilizer up to date as well, to get a good first cut of silage in the yard, but also to put those high quality bales there too. And I suppose just, James, on the last point of view, as we said, finally a bit of decent weather. Farmers have been busy the last couple of weeks, but I think it is important that we can target, and we're after having the I suppose our numerous spring grass clover events there throughout the country. If there's reseeding going on, second rotation now, ideal opportunity to pull out that paddock to a paddock or two to get them done. And there's a Grass10 clover check checklist there. I suppose, are you ready to incorporate the clover on farm this spring? And it's just a few key points in terms of getting your grass seed ordered, getting a good bag of grass seed together there, in terms of maybe, from the varieties from the pasture profit index, and 2 kilos of white clover, and getting your contractor, your lime, your 10-10-20 all there, and your clover safe spray. So it's just, I suppose, getting all in aligned for over the next few weeks to get that in, and get it in early, that it gets the best chance over the summer to tiller with constant grazings out there.
Very good, Joe. As you say, it's been a tough slog, and it's finally changed. And I suppose it's hard for farmers to get their head around that we're thinking about reseeding, but we're heading for the 3rd week of April, and we do want to get those early summer reseeds in. So the time doesn't be long changing. Look, I want to thank you. I think we're going to touch on a lot of those points with Seamus. As you say, listeners and viewers, they can access that. That's the Grass10 newsletter that you're after going through. So they can access that through Pasture Base, Joe, on a weekly basis. Isn't that correct?
Can do. Yeah. You can sign up for it there on the Grass10 website there too.
Lovely, Joe. Thanks a million.
Okay, great stuff. Thanks, James.
Seamus, I was saying we have a full kind of west of Ireland viewpoint with Joe from Sligo, and you're from Roscommon, Longford. So, but come here, I suppose, to follow on from that a little bit, we were kind of spoilt in February in the fact that usually, possibly in the west and the northern areas, we feed a little bit more silage in February and less in March and April. How did your guys get on? It was a tough slug from that kind of March period on. What's happening in that Roscommon Longford catchment?
Yeah, look, I suppose I met groups in early March, and I met them again last week, and I suppose it was a different story for both meetings, like, So when we met lads in early March, a lot of lads had a good bit of grazing done. I'd say it was the first time in a long time, I'd say, that the majority of lads had probably hit 30% grazed. Even on heavier farms, lads maybe wouldn't normally get out maybe until the end of February or the 1st of March anyway. But a lot of those had hit the 30% graze, and were flying it, And then of course March came, and in all fairness, I don't think we got it as bad as other parts of the country. I think down south, I know we often claim that down south is a different climate to us, but I think over the last 6 months or so, they've got their fair share of rain, even more so than we've got. So, like, we got about 160 millimeters of rain here for March, and normally you'd have 70 to 100, depending on the year. So it did put the kibosh on things, I suppose. And now, saying that, some lads will say the more determined fellas on drier farms got a good bit of grazing done during March, and we're housed for small enough periods of time. But there are some fellas, as Joe says there, that literally were housed for a fortnight or 3 weeks there at some stage, and are only really beginning to. Even last week here now, I had we say 4 group meetings, and we spent 3 of them in the shed looking out at the rain.
Yes.
It's only in the last few days, we had heavy rain again on Saturday, so cows are out again now, all right, over the last week or so, but it's only beginning to improve at this stage. But it's still cold,
Yeah. And we're slow to get back grazing, Shamey, or what's I suppose we were spoilt, as you say, we were on target and ahead of target, and then our guys kind of getting back now. What's the situation? What's
fellas are getting back. I generally find, that once fellas get out, if they get out early at all, they're sort of determined to keep them out, and they're determined to get them back out then, whereas if fellas don't get them out at all, that early period, then on heavier farms, they're probably that bit slower to get them going in March then, but they had them out early, so they were determined enough. And I even came across a couple of cases where lads just decided, protein was on the floor, it has gone below 3%, they said, hell with this, they have to go out, because the silage just wasn't good enough, and they let them out, put them back out, even though they might be doing a bit of damage, but they were willing to sacrifice that on the basis of the milk, on the proteins and that,
Yep. And come here, you were saying to me, you run group reports there. Where's actually we seen average cover nationally is something close to 800. Where would your own groups be sitting at?
Look, I ran a report myself. I do run a report every week and send it out to fellas for a cover. I do capture a cover that's done in the previous 2 weeks, maybe at this time of the year. At the minute, it's at 783, on that, which is close enough to the national average. But if I exclude a few lads out of that, maybe that have no grazing done or very little grazing done, like there's a few lads with very high covers there on the system. Now, you'd question, I don't know how they were calculated, but if you take a few of those outliers out of it, I suppose the coverage is closer to maybe 730 or 740, you know. So and growth rate over the last 2 weeks has been about 33.
Right.
You know, yeah.
So probably this week you're growing north of 40 or those
Yeah, I'd
farms.
expect that. Yeah. Now, within that, obviously, if you have an average group cover of 730 or 740, this fella's up to 1,000 and this fella's down at 500 in that, like, you know. So that what I'm seeing is that maybe the lads that kept grazing, we say the more determined fellas on drier farms that were able to keep cows grazing, they're at the lower end of the cover at the minute. Which I suppose in some ways it's not a bad position to be. You know, we talk about starting the second round with low, you like to be tight on grass at the start of the second round before grazing takes off, because it's a sort of means in itself of controlling things, like, you know. So it's the people who have the higher covers at this stage now that you're probably be more worried about, like, do you know.
Very good. And come here, in terms of fertilizer then, difficult, obviously whatever was got out was plenty of slurry probably got out in February in terms of and good conditions for it. Talk me through in terms of where guys are actually at now from a grazing perspective. Are they up to date with fertilizer? What's the...
I think over the last week or so now, fellas have got out and topped up. I suppose their product of choice nearly at this stage now is a compound if they have a P allowance, like they're going with like 18612 or something similar like that. Try and get a bit of P and K on the grazing on any ground that hasn't got slurry, I should say, really, like, you know.
Yes.
So majority of lads, I suppose, have 50 or so units out. Up until the end of March, or the first week in April, I should say, on the grazing ground. So they're beginning to top that up now again. You know.
So now really what you're saying, they're following with compounds, what, a bag and a half of 18612 or
bag and a half
something.
18612, exactly. Yeah. Now there are some lads on very wet farms that have no fertilizer out at all.
Okay.
You know,
and
there
in
are
terms
those situations.
The advice for them, Seamus, now I suppose is as ground conditions have improved, what are you telling those guys?
I surely they'd want to go with a bag of urea, you know. I know it may sound counter, I suppose, productive, or not counterproductive, but in terms of bad advice. But some of them lads have a lot of grass on the place as well, like, you know, in terms of they've not grazing done. But you have to remember, I suppose, that the fertilizer you're putting out now is for grass that you're going to graze in 5 or 6 weeks' time. So if they take the approach that, well, sure, we've lots of grass, we won't put out any fertilizer, they could well see themselves tight in 5 or 6 weeks' time, you know.
Yeah. It's that one in terms of lots of grass on the farm. They're nearly slow to go with fertilizer. They're struggling to get through that grass, but as you say, it's important. Come here, talk to me about. I see the feed and fodder committee met nationally there. I think it was last week. A lot of silage stocks, as Joe said, used up around the country between dry conditions last back end and a tough spring. Talk to me. Where are your guys at?
Funny enough, we spoke of this about group meetings last week, because on the data sheet that they were sending in, there was a good few lads still feeding silage, you know. Obviously some fellas were in full time near enough. There was some lads feeding maybe in at night, a good few fellas in at night, I suppose, and some fellas, as Joe says, still feeding they were still out, they were getting a couple of kilos of silage in at milking time and that sort of thing. I'd say, rough estimate, about 5% of fellas were out of silage. You know, low enough, like, you know, some like the amount of fellas that were out of silage and were buying silage was low enough. Now I'd say less than 5%. Still lots of silage in the area, like, you know, there's no shortage of silage. I'd say about another, 20-25% of fellas had about 3 to 4 weeks silage left, you know.
Yes.
And the rest of them seemed to have lots of silage, you know. Now, quality of that silage is another story, but there's fibre in the yard, we'll put it that way, you know.
So I suppose there's 30% that have either used up or are digging into that reserve that they like to be carrying, that has to be rebuilt.
Now those lads, I suppose, those fellas that had the 20-25% that had 3 weeks left since last week, there wouldn't be a lot of that fed, like, really, you know. So they probably have the most of that 3 week buffer left, you know.
Okay.
Yeah.
You mentioned, I'll come back to fertilizer in a minute, but you mentioned silage quality. I was out with a few groups myself in March. Everyone was complaining of protein percentage and where it was at. Was there ever a period in terms of where silage quality probably causes serious frustration at farm level. Was there much chat in your groups about that, or what are lads thinking in terms of silage quality in this year ahead, I suppose?
Sure. Look, actually in the March meetings, we put a good emphasis on making quality silage, like going forward, and the need to be cutting it, around that mid 15th to 20th of May period, or in around that, or even earlier in some cases. Like you have to look at what the lads that are consistently making good quality silage, what are they doing?
Yeah.
They're cutting it early. They're probably not poisoning it with nitrogen. Getting a reasonable crop in that mid-May period, and normally we will get that week to 10 days of some period in May where the weather is good and it's fit for making silage, and they can go then and they can cut it, like they're not still waiting for the nitrogen to go out of it. Whereas fellas that would have normally put out 80 to 90 units, it's not going over until the end of May, really, so a bit of emphasis on that. We have gone through it, in terms of what fellas need to do, and I suppose that there isn't enough milk and cow silage, as we call it, made on farms, I suppose, as such.
Yeah. There's nearly an emphasis now on making dry cow silage, where that, to a certain degree, some of that stuff makes itself. It's
oh, it does, yeah. It's very easy to make that now, in fairness. And look at it, if you haven't got it, you'll get it. You'll get it not too far away. You're short of a few bales.
Absolutely. And as you say, I suppose this year time and fertilizer application is probably a bit later. So that kind of general consensus is reduce the rate slightly and hold cutting date as such. Pádraig O'Kiley's work, I remember looking at it in terms of when you look at the annual yields, pushing that first cut cutting date back. Really, all it's doing is pinching from second cut and maybe not allowing lads to make third cuts.
So I think in general, what fellas are doing, they're sort of reducing the amount of, at this stage, maybe going with maybe about 60 units. Like some of that ground has got slurry already, maybe earlier in the year, so they're maybe going with 60 units of a top up now with aim to cutting it in 15th, 20th of May.
Yep. Breeding. What are we on? We're on the 20th of April. When do guys normally start in your area, and what's their thinking this year, I suppose?
Look, they normally start around the 1st of May, I suppose, is normally, or the last few days of April is kind of, I suppose, wherever the Monday starts in or around that time, I suppose, generally.
I actually think it's the 1st of May this year, as far as I'm aware. So yeah, as you say,
but it's probably a bank holiday, so they mightn't start until Tuesday.
Absolutely. Especially if Roscommon are still in the championship, they mightn't start at all for another couple of weeks.
What do you mean if? But anyway, so breeding, so look, I don't think lads are, in terms of starting date, aren't doing anything different. Like they're still sticking to their dates. I suppose what fellas did find is that even though they are maybe not starting until around the 1st of May, that a lot of animals calved at the end of January, with short gestation bulls, etc. So that's part and parcel of the thing, so they're reluctant to go any earlier, I suppose, in terms of breeding.
That's what I was gonna ask, because there is a little bit of that creeping a little bit earlier with sex semen and stuff, but your guys are kind of holding steady, I suppose. They don't want calves before that kind of end of January period.
But they're getting them already, like even with conventional semen and short gestation bulls, they are coming maybe around the 20th of January, so you could have lads with 15% of the herd calve before their due date at all, so they're not doing anything different, I don't think, in terms of mate and start date,
And the trends, I suppose, look, the trend is to greater use of sex semen, I suppose. The guys that used it, the farmers you had that used it last year, how did they get on? Is the trend to more sex semen being used within your own client base, or what's the thoughts, or what's the topic conversation around that, Jamie?
Look, I had a good few fellas that used it last year, I suppose, tried it mainly on heifer. Some lads tried it on cows. I don't think there was any disaster stories. Like fellas got on, in general, I think fellas got on fairly well with it, like they were happy enough. And I suppose we'd be kind of telling lads to try it on the heifers with a fixed time AA protocol first and see how we get on with that. Some fellas went ahead and used it on cows, and not even with a fixed time AI protocol, they just on unobserved heats and that, and they got on well enough with it, they got on fairly well with it, so there's probably a bit more lads, maybe fellas that used it on heifers last year might be going to try it on cows this year. but in general, lads were happy enough. But what happened really, I suppose, last year, and I know we've seen it on some farms, is that they were a bit overcautious with the amount of dairy semen that they used, and they've ended up with a lot of Frisian heifer calves on the ground now. You know, in terms of they got on better than expected, maybe with sex semen, and they use a considerable amount of conventional straws then on cows, and there seems to be a good lot of Frisian heifers knocking around the place now, particularly on some of the larger farms anyway. You know?
Yeah, so really to mitigate that risk, there was more conventional going in, Seamus.
Yeah.
Is that they're kind of happy now to maybe cut back on that?
Yeah.
They've built that bit of confidence.
Yeah, I look at they're a bit more calculated in the amount of straws that they're using. You're getting a few more phone calls. Well, you know, how many straws do we need to use? I want this many heifers, you know.
Yeah.
So we're kind of working on the basis of if you calculate that you get maybe a 60% conception rate on the heifers and maybe a 50% on the cows that you're using fixed or sex semen on, you know, work on the basis of those figures for the amount of straws that you'll use, you know.
And in general, in terms of what's the protocols of choice on heifers, or where's the conversation around that in terms of fixed time, maybe the 7-day program, natural heats, what's happening?
Most fellas are using that 8-day program, you know, our standard program, I suppose, as such. It seems to be very little variation around that. That's what I'm seeing. I've come across a couple of cases now where lads were kind of edging towards using sex semen on heifers with no protocol, like, you know, just on observed heats. And look, I'd be a bit nervous about that, really, I suppose. And I suppose the other thing that has come up at group meetings there over the last couple of weeks as well, up until a week or 10 days ago, there was still a lot of heifers in sheds, you know. And look, what farmers will always tell you, oh, the heifers were bulling mad in the shed, and we let them out then, that couldn't get them coming a bulling at all. So they're a bit nervous maybe about, some of them were even considering leaving the heifers in until they were bolt, you know, at this stage.
Okay.
Which, no, I still think that if the heifers are let out and if you're putting them on a fixed time protocol, they'll be sound, like, you know. But if you were aiming to do normal heat detection on them, it could be a bit more challenging, like, as such.
Yeah. But it'd be important that they'll be getting out. If they're not out, they'll be getting out now, that they have a fortnight to get settled in, I suppose, before they would be getting a straw. I suppose with that, then there's a selection of cows piece. What the guys are probably asking in terms of Seamus, I want to put dairy semen into my best cows. What's the protocols? What are guys looking for there? How are they selecting these cows?
Well, they're selecting them on the basis of, well, I'm telling them anyway, is look at your milk recording, like, you know, look at your best cows that are producing your highest fat and protein percent as a starting point. Like, there's no point in just because a cow calves on the 1st of February every year, like, you know, doesn't mean she should breed a heifer calf, like, if she's not producing the goods in terms of milk solids and fat and protein percent. So, like, fellas are definitely looking at milk recording and EBI data. You know, in general, those cows that are top of the list in terms of fat and protein percent will be high on the milk subindex, I suppose, on the EBI anyway, you know, in general. Now, you will have a few outliers normally enough. So other than that, we're kind of telling lads, look, younger cows, probably no more than 4th lactation, ideally 1st, 2nd or 3rd lactation, I'd say. Cows that have no health issues, good body condition score, no calving issues, you know, basically she's
calved early and ready to go type of thing.
And you calved over 50 days, like, you know. So yeah,
very good. Obviously, then that's leaving more cows open to beef. What is there's a big push on in terms of improving the quality of our calf crop. Clients that would have maybe improved the quality of beef AI bulls last year, I suppose, firstly, how did they get on? The concern is always calving difficulty and increasing that calving difficulty in the calving house. How have those guys got on that's placed a bit more emphasis on calf quality?
Well, I've had no reports of any issues with calving difficulty, I suppose, to put it like that, you know.
Yes.
Fellas seem to get on fine with it. Seem to be no issue moving the calves as such, like in general, I think calves moved quite well this year. The only blip was when the weather got bad there in March, and maybe boats weren't moving, and few of the bits and pieces. And in general, calf health was good as well. Like, you know, when the weather changed in March, nearly everybody seemed to get little bit of touch of crypto and things like that. So, but other than that, calves seem to be move on quite well and quite healthy. But in relation to the calf and difficulty side of it and the beef side of the house, I've had no, I suppose, negative reports of anything by using the higher DBI bulls. The one thing I suppose a couple of fellas have said to me is that coming to the end of breeding, they're probably going to focus a little bit more on gestation length. You know,
Okay.
So some of them got caught maybe with bulls that are trying to carry a bit of time, and a cow that maybe should have been calved 10 days ago, she's still in the calf in the shed, like, do you know.
So really, in terms of maybe switching back to a slightly shorter gestation bull for those last couple of weeks, just to get them tidied up.
Yeah, definitely. Okay. Yeah.
Very good. One question in there, Seamus, in terms of if you've heifers around 270 to 280 kilos now, and mating start date isn't until the 8th of May, is there any chance of them getting up to target? What's that? That's 3 weeks, is it?
That's 3 weeks, yeah. So
what are those heifers going to do in a 3-week period?
3 weeks. So we say they have 21 days if they put on. Look, we say if they've been out a fortnight already, right? And they're acclimatized. So you'd be hoping that they'll put on over a kilo a day over that 21 days. So we say they might put on 25 kilos. So that'll bring them up to they're what do you say they're 270 kilos, is it?
270, 280. So they're 295, 300.
Yeah, 295, 300. They're still going to be light, aren't they? Like the best thing, it depends on what they are. Like if they're crossbreds, they'll probably be fine. Like, but if they're black and whites, they're underweight. The best thing you can hope for them is put them on a fixed time protocol and see will it if they're like if they have some of them might have cycled, you know. The fixed time protocol has probably your best chance, but I don't think any of the other protocols will have any effect on them, like will work.
But you're right, Seamus, in the fact some people maybe look at holding off on breeding those heifers. It's important to go and get them bred and a little bit of TLC maybe after that to get them back on target. You wouldn't be going with sex semen in that case,
no,
Seamus?
No.
Go with conventional there in that case.
Conventional, yeah.
Very good. In terms of overall performance, then what's happening is cow performance. Is it up or back on last year? Is solids improving over the last few weeks?
Solids last week were very poor. Like, you know, your average and proteins averaging about 325. You know, so it's very, very poor. Like, and now obviously there's a big variation in that. There's lads below 3% and there's lads up at 340. So like what I'm seeing is the fellas who got cows out early and kept them out as reasonable amount, they're the ones that are up at 340, heading for 350 at the minute. Some lads that got little or no grazing done, they're the ones that are below 3% in general, you know. So there's an awful urgency and to get grass into cows now to correct that, because one thing having milk price fallen, like we say the base price fallen by 5 or 6 cents per month there for the last few months, but when you have proteins on the floor as well, it's a double whammy. Like, and in general, I'm not saying fellas aren't concerned about the fall in base milk price, like, but you never hear them complaining too much at group meetings about it. It's the things that they can control, I suppose, in terms of proteins and that they're more concerned about.
So really, I think if we wrap it up on that, the big message there, Shamey, is get cows back grazing full time. If they're not, get them
silage out of the diet.
Covers.
Yeah, fairly quick. Yeah,
absolutely. Look, I want to thank you for coming on. It's good to get a feel for what's happening on the ground. We wish you well in the hide on Sunday. Really, I suppose Seamus's mood on Monday morning is going to be determined on
well, it might be, because technically I'm a Longford man, so. As regards football, my mood is constantly on the floor in relation to that one. But
you're long enough in Roscommon now; they'll accept you as one of your own. Come here, thanks, Seamus, and thanks for our viewers. We'll be back next week with a farmer perspective. Donal Ronan's joining us from the Revo Farm Profitability Programme, so we'll get a feel for what's happening next week with Donal. All right, thanks a million, folks. Thanks again, Seamus.
Thanks. See you later. Bye.
Cheers. Bye-bye.